The Immigration Subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee will come to order. A quorum is present. The chair asks unanimous consent that Mr. Lawler of New York be seated on the subcommittee for the hearing. Is there any objection? Hearing none, Mr. Lawler, welcome to the subcommittee. The Immigration Subcommittee meets today to hear testimony on the effect of the ongoing border crisis that began on Inauguration Day of 2021. We have four witnesses with us today who are going to testify to the effects that this is having on the social services of our cities, as well as the tragedies that it is causing for our citizens. With that, we will begin with our first witness is Chief Rodney Scott, formerly the Chief of the Border Patrol of the United States. Mr. Scott, we welcome you to the hearing today and recognize you. Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to start with, see, that's what happens when I go scriptless. I will actually begin with opening statements, and I'll begin with myself. When President Biden canceled construction of the border wall and ordered ICE not to enforce court-ordered deportations, we have seen 2.1 million illegal immigrants unlawfully admitted to the United States by this administration. That is a population larger than the entire state of Nebraska. And while that's been going on, an additional 1.5 million known gotaways have entered while the Border Patrol has been overwhelmed. That's an additional illegal population larger than the state of Hawaii. Combined, that's 3.6 million illegal migrants admitted to our country. That's larger than the population of 20 of our states, and that's just in 28 months. The danger of this policy should be self-evident. When the president surrendered unconditionally to the Taliban and abandoned Bagram Air Base in the middle of the night, he released 5,000 of the most dangerous terrorists on the planet who were detained there. We know where one went. 10 days later, he went to Abbey Gate at Kabul airport and detonated the bomb that killed 13 U.S. Marines. We know that nearly 200 individuals on the terrorist watch list were apprehended by the Border Patrol in 2022 and 2023, compared to just 14 in all 4 years of the Trump administration combined. What we don't know is how many more are among the 1.5 million known gotaways. Now, HHS Secretary Javier Becerra told his staff that he demanded a rapid release of illegal migrants into the country. He compared it to an assembly line, and he warned subordinates that if they didn't move faster, he'd find others who would. The lack of any serious vetting of those entering our country is producing tragic results for families like that of Kayla Hamilton, whose grieving mother we will hear from today. In her case, a 17-year-old MS-13 gang member was released into the United States as an unaccompanied alien child. Kayla Hamilton is dead as a result. Police investigating her murder noticed her assailant had gang tattoos, and one call to El Salvadorian authorities confirmed he was a known MS-13 gang member, something federal officials never bothered to ask, as they recklessly allowed him to enter the United States. Drug trafficking now produces an average of 200 fentanyl deaths in the United States every day, the equivalent of a passenger jet crashing every day. Just a few days of such carnage would ground every aircraft in America. But we're told that human trafficking is now becoming an even more profitable business to the cartels than drugs. Illegal migrants arrive deeply in debt to the cartels, whose violent gangs are proliferating in our cities to enforce these debts. In places like Tulare County, California, just outside of my district, we're starting to see cartel executions of entire families, including, in this case, a mom shot through the head as she shielded her baby. Every Border Patrol officer says the same thing. This is no longer a border problem. If it hasn't already come to your community, it soon will. I'm afraid this will culminate either in a terrorist attack by elements that have come in through our border or the kind of cartel gun battles breaking out in cities that have already become commonplace in Mexico. Now, this is not to paint every illegal migrant as a gang member or terrorist, but the Biden open borders policy is clearly allowing many dangerous gang members, terrorists, and criminals into our country, and he doesn't seem to care about the resulting damage. Meanwhile, the social safety net meant to help Americans in need is collapsing under the weight of millions of desperate, destitute, and dependent illegal migrants who are flooding our country. New York City has now turned as many as 20 public school gymnasiums into hotels for illegal aliens. Recess is canceled because single adult men are sleeping on cots in gyms intended for school children. We've heard from food pantries whose supplies are exhausted because of the explosion of illegal migrants. We've heard from hospital administrators at the border who've had to tell American citizens that they have no room for them because they're overwhelmed by migrants. And we hear from law enforcement of the increasing presence of criminal cartels and foreign gangs in their communities. Yet the Democrats' witness is going to tell us the solution is simply spend more money and process illegal migrants faster. This is lunacy. It is a crime to illegally enter the United States. Federal law requires every asylum claimant to be detained until their case is heard and to be deported if it's rejected. But this administration simply ignores the law. Now, these first hearings have examined the effect of these policies. Over the next few weeks, we will turn our attention to the cause, what laws are being violated and by whom. And with that, I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Jayapal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start just by taking a moment to express my deepest condolences to you, Ms. Nobles. You have experienced a profound loss, and I appreciate your coming to share Kayla's story with us today. Turning to today's hearing, it appears once again, unfortunately, that it's Groundhog Day in our subcommittee. Today is part 3 of our hearings on the Republicans' assault on immigrants and immigration, and I'm sure we'll have many more parts to come. I worry that today will be more of the same, with my Republican colleagues once again showing us that they are not serious about governing and finding solutions to the complex issue of immigration. After passing their extreme, cruel, and unworkable border bill, where the only bipartisan thing about it was the opposition, Republicans have spent the last few weeks fear-mongering over the end of Title 42. This fear-mongering about the border, let me be clear, empowers the smugglers and cartels when our Republican colleagues claim that the border is open. That is the most important information that they use to continue their activities. Turns into disinformation and misinformation shared by smugglers, distributed by social media, and stoked by relentless right-wing media lies and shouts of open borders, all of which fuel migration patterns. And yet, what are the facts? The facts are that when Title 42, a public health policy, not an immigration enforcement policy, finally ended, what happened? Border encounters plummeted by 70%. Thus far, the increased migration narrative pushed in the right-wing media has not yet come. The lower numbers are likely due, at least in part, to the Biden administration's new policies announced in the lead-up to the end of Title 42. These announcements detailed how they plan to address migration to the southwest border going forward. The administration showed that once again, Democrats have real, workable solutions to manage migration and expand legal pathways. On top of the parole programs created by the Biden administration earlier this year, the administration announced the creation of additional legal pathways that are intended to relieve pressure at the border. The administration announced that they're opening regional processing centers across the Western Hemisphere for the first time to facilitate access to legal pathways in the United States. This is an important step to allow migrants to get their protection and benefits claims assessed in a humane way without having to make the dangerous journey to the U.S.-Mexico border. The administration is also creating new family reunification parole processes for El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Colombia. This is for people who already have an approved family petition modeled off of the Cuban family reunification program my colleagues attempted to codify in H.R. 2. The administration is also increasing the number of appointments that will be available under the CBP One app, which, while far from perfect, does increase CBP's ability to process more migrants. The administration also implemented new policies that I do have significant concerns about. This includes a new asylum regulation that limits access to asylum for those who cross between ports of entry, as well as new expedited processing of single adults from Spanish-speaking countries, where individuals will get an initial asylum screening in a Border Patrol facility. Now, none of these solutions are perfect. Addressing the issue of migration is difficult, but Democrats have shown time and time again that we take this complex humanitarian crisis seriously. By creating a more humane immigration system that recognizes the horrific conditions that cause migrants to flee, as well as contributions of immigrants to America, we can decrease unauthorized crossings, strengthen our economy, and protect migrants and citizens from harm. Unfortunately, Republicans have showed us their priorities with their border bill and now with their fiscal year 2024 Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill. That bill would only create more disorder at the border. Budgets are moral documents that show what we value and prioritize. Their bill, which was released last week, defunds the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, which is helping migrants who are processed by CBP move away from the border to be with sponsors or family in the United States as they await their court hearing. Their bill ends the use of Family Case Management Program, which had a nearly 100% success rate in helping families show up for their immigration court hearings. And it disallows the use of alternatives to detention unless the Secretary himself directly approves it, which would create a significant bottleneck for moving people out of CBP custody. It defunds the asylum officer rule, which allows asylum officers to adjudicate asylum claims, helps alleviate the growing immigration court backlog, and it ends the use of the CBP One app for people who are coming in through parole, which will severely hamper CBP's ability to process migrants in a safe and orderly way. Now, all of these policy choices give the game away. None of these policy choices are intended to help the agency. They will create more chaos and disorder at the border. But that appears to be the point of my Republican colleagues' efforts. Create chaos and disorder and hope to win the next election. Now, if the chairman of the subcommittee is so concerned about airplanes being grounded, I would just say that the Default on America Act and the attempts that Republicans are making right now to put forward serious cuts, that default would actually halt all of the air traffic controllers across the country. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today. The American people deserve better, and I hope that our witnesses can shed light on real solutions to address the situation at our border in a holistic way. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the chairman. The ranking member started her statement by saying the border is secure. Really? More than 5.5 million illegal aliens along the southwest border have been encountered since Joe Biden took office. 2 million of these illegal aliens have been released into American communities, and more than 1.5 million known illegal gotaways have successfully crossed the southwest border undetected. These include criminal gang members, drug dealers, and individuals on the terrorist watch list. That is not a secure border. That is not a closed border.
I never said that. I never started my statement with a secure border. Mr.
That has happened because on day one.
I'm correcting the record because you stated something that was not true. Thank you, Mr.
The gentlelady should know that interrupting a member without making a valid point of order is against the rules of the committee.
Don't lie about what I said.
The time belongs to the chairman. Chairman's recognized.
I would just point out the gentlelady said Republicans say the border is open. She said that's not so. Is that so? What does that mean? If it's not open, is it something that's not secure, not closed? I would just saying what she referenced in her opening statement. Day one of this administration, they stopped construction of the wall, they ended Remain in Mexico, and they put back in place catch and release. Day one. That is why we have the situation we do. In that same time period I just talked about, 28 months of this administration, over 43,000 pounds of fentanyl have been seized at the southwest border, with an unknown amount making it into our communities. And there's also been an uptick in the number of individuals on the FBI terrorist watch list. Just 2 weeks ago, Border Patrol apprehended an Afghan who illegally crossed into San Diego sector in California, and days later, news reports indicate that an additional 5 watch-listed illegal aliens were apprehended in Tucson, Arizona, after attempting to avoid detection. Our witnesses today understand the consequences of our borders being unprotected all too well, all of them, and I want to thank them for being here today. I want to particularly thank Ms. Nobles for bravely agreeing to appear here today to talk about the unthinkable tragedy that affected her family. Her daughter, Kaylee, was 20 years old when she was assaulted and murdered. The person charged with the crime was an MS-13 gang member who was allowed to enter the United States after crossing the border illegally as a so-called unaccompanied alien child. Despite the USC having a criminal history in El Salvador for MS-13 gang affiliation well before he even entered the United States, law enforcement only became aware of this fact after Kaylee's murder. Why not until after Kaylee's murder? Because prior to the murder, no one in this administration bothered to check into the UAC's criminal history in his home country. And the Hamilton family was not alone this year in experiencing such a horrific event. In January, suspected cartel members massacred 6 people, including a 10-month-old infant, assassination style in Goshen, California. In April of this year, a nationwide manhunt ensued after a man who had been deported on 4 separate occasions killed 5 people, including a 9-year-old boy. It's well past time that we enforce the law, secure our border, and we should pass, the Senate should pass, the bill that we passed in the House just a few weeks ago so we can get our border under control and secure. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first wish to express my most sincere condolences to Ms. Nobles. I'm so sorry for your loss, and I thank you for coming to tell us Kayla's story. May her memory be a blessing. Mr. Chairman, the United States has a long history of welcoming asylum seekers to our shores. My constituents in Manhattan are able to see a reminder of this history every day in the Statue of Liberty, welcoming the tired, the poor, and huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Throughout our history, refugees from near and far have sought safety here. And while our laws have never been perfect, they have always allowed at least some refugees to enter. Our modern refugee program and the world's view about our collective responsibility for refugees were radically reshaped by the Holocaust. When the United States joined both Canada and Cuba in turning away the MS St. Louis and her more than 900 Jewish passengers in 1939, we allowed asylum seekers to be returned to persecution in Europe. Nearly 1/3 of the boat's passengers perished at the hands of the Nazis. Many other countries also turned away Jewish refugees during World War II. The horrors that followed led to the creation of the United Nations and ultimately to the international refugee framework that we still use today. It took a while for domestic laws to catch up to our international commitments, so when Congress moved too slowly, presidents used their expansive immigration powers to help get people to safety. In 1956, President Eisenhower oversaw the parole of over 30,000 Hungarian refugees into the United States. More parolees followed, including more than 58,000 Cubans between 1961 and 1962, 15,000 Chinese refugees from Hong Kong between 1962 and 1966, and over 130,000 Southeast Asian refugees following the fall of Saigon in 1975. We passed the Refugee Act of 1980 with overwhelming bipartisan support, which established the domestic framework for refugee and asylee processing. The commitment by presidents and lawmakers of both parties to accept refugees solidified our country's status as a symbol of hope for those trying to escape persecution. Sadly, that came to a crashing halt under the Trump administration. Former President Trump slashed our refugee program both at home and abroad, implemented discriminatory bans, demonized immigrants, separated families, and put all of his focus into building a wall between ourselves and Mexico. But still people came, because the dangers they faced on their journeys here paled in comparison to the horrors from which they were fleeing. COVID exacerbated the problems, and President Trump used authorities under Title 42, a policy to protect public health, to turn away asylum seekers arriving at the border. When President Biden came into office, he reversed course on many of the prior administration's most heinous policies. But Title 42 remained, even while our Republican colleagues claimed that the border was open and that President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas were purposefully inviting an invasion, in quotes, of migrants to our shores. These claims were used by smugglers to entice migrants to make the journey north and echoed by mass shooters in their manifestos. The Biden administration has been working to get our immigration system back on track, but Republicans have been fighting him every step of the way. They voted to end the COVID emergency declaration, but they said that the administration should not end its use of Title 42, even though that policy was tied to the pandemic. They passed a messaging bill over bipartisan opposition that would decimate our asylum system and send vulnerable people back into harm's way. In the weeks leading up to Title 42's expiration, they stoked fears that we would see chaos and massive numbers of migrants crossing at the border. And yet, what happened? Thanks to the policies put in place by the Biden administration, the numbers at the border dropped by 70% following the expiration of Title 42. But the fear-mongering continues. Unfortunately, my colleagues are not ones to let facts get in the way of a good story. The latest example comes from my home state of New York, where Orange County Republicans claimed that homeless veterans were being displaced by migrants. This was quickly echoed by the Speaker of the House and other congressional Republicans, and even by one of our witnesses. On the screen are tweet after tweet by my Republican colleagues amplifying the story to stoke fears about the border and to distract from their own failures to enact meaningful solutions. Yet the claims contained in the story have turned out to be completely unfounded, with even the New York Post running a retraction. So here we are again, in another hearing about the, quote, Biden border crisis, close quote. I'm sure that no matter what happens at the border, we will continue to have hearings on this topic. And we will continue to see partisan messaging bills that have no chance of ever becoming law. As one of my Republican colleagues said, there's a reason why we haven't gotten significant border security done and why we haven't seen significant immigration reform done. It is in the interests of many politicians to have this crisis continue to flare up. Democrats are willing to work with serious Republicans to make changes to our immigration system that would allow people to come here lawfully while ensuring the safety and security of our citizens. We want to have the tough conversations about the best path forward. And we have passed bipartisan legislation that has addressed some of the thorniest issues, like the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. But so long as this majority insists on its partisan blame games, we are just going to keep talking past each other, and nothing will be solved. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. Thank you for coming to speak about your experience and your expertise, and I yield back the balance of my time.